You and I know
Mhm.
the basis of truth is God and his word, which is absolutely true. And I can start there no matter where I'm at, no matter where I'm going. I can rely on God's word and say, this is 100% true. If it's in conflict with this, it's bad. If it agrees with this, it's good. And go
Yeah.
from there. And I also, as a student of history and who recognizes certain things are true, regardless of whether people know it or not, or believe it or not, or have the background information or not, that they are true. And the Holocaust did happen. But we've entered this era where you question the Holocaust because, like, did it really happen? What about the post-war consensus? They've lied to us about so many things. Da, 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 da. And
Yeah.
what's really insidious about this is there's been this little I'll say subversive group of anti-Semites who have existed for decades in America, but in the shadows, in the sewers, in the alleys, in the dark. But they, in that time that they've been, kind of pushed down and marginalized, they've built up a really strong body of a narrative. Like they
Yeah.
have,
That's
like,
for sure.
so in other words, like the groups that take power when an insurgency, when a government collapses and a revolution occurs, an insurgency occurs, it's never actually spontaneous. There are
Mm.
groups who are organized already who jump on this scene and they take power. And so the anti-Semites, the neo-Nazis, were very well organized in terms of the body of information that they had, the narratives that they had to deploy. And as soon as the trust for the established institutions collapsed, they're like, boom, have you guys taken a look at Israel?
Yeah.
How about the
Yeah. I want to
USS
give an
Liberty?
example of this because and you tell me if this is comparative.
Yeah.
But one, I think you're right that one, we absolutely have been lied to about a lot of things. I think
Yes.
one dangerous thing is when we start saying they've lied to us about everything, because
Hmm.
whenever we start denying everything that we've learned, we're going to start throwing out truth with lies. And so
Yes.
we can't just throw out everything we've learned and then rebuild from whatever kind of
Absolutely.
spurious evidence we see on the internet. We have
Yes.
to analyze everything that we care to analyze one thing at a time and throw out what's false only. And it seems
Yes.
like what people are doing is they're saying, well, they lied to us about Martin Luther King Jr. and they've lied to us about, whatever, like the Kennedy assassination. They've lied to us
Yeah.
about, whatever. And so then they say, oh, they've also, and maybe there are some like weird details or some possible things that were hidden about the Holocaust, and they say, "Oh, here are a couple things that I've never heard before." And ironically, one of the things that you don't read about in the history books is the evidence that Hitler was bisexual or of his possible Jewish ancestry. And there were
Right.
like stuff you don't hear about that, but that doesn't fit into their narrative, and so
Hmm.
that's not part of the story that they want to push. But this
Yeah.
seems like if you go digging into something like flat Earth, there are so many flat earth communities and they have mountains of what they consider to be evidence.
Yes.
And like there are documents and there's
Yeah.
tons of stuff. And so it seems like what happened here is in this situation where people are really comfortable with questioning things, people aren't taking flat earth seriously, thankfully.
Yeah.
But with the Holocaust, they're like the flat earthers where they
Hmm.
in their secret little 4chan communities have
Hmm.
all of this
Yeah.
stuff built up. Sounds
Yeah.
like what you're saying, and
Yeah.
that's accurate. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're like, hey, look at all this evidence we have. And people aren't, I think you said uh this new social media atmosphere, especially on X, allows people to think critically. And I think it allows the people who think critically to prosper. But
Yeah.
it also, I think, and what's kind of causing this, in my opinion, is people who aren't thinking critically, but are especially susceptible to being led by their emotions.
Hmm.
The people who are refusing or don't know how to think critically
Yeah.
for whatever reason, um, because they're angry or they're disenfranchised or because they,
Yeah.
who knows what reason. But those emotional people are driven by hatred, saying like, well, I'm oppressed and I'm looking for a victim. Just like critical race theory,
Yeah.
they're like, well, the white people are in charge, so the white people are all evil, and I'm
Hmm.
going to make myself a victim if I'm a black person, whatever. And so this is just critical race theory
Yeah.
2.0, where they're saying, I'm white, I'm oppressed. Who's a good oppressor that I can pick? The
Yeah.
Jews. Or
Yeah.
some days on the internet, it's the women, or it's the blacks are actually, they change
Yeah.
their mind, but the Jews
Yeah.
is always the popular one they go to. And then that seems to have filled this gap for these people who lack
Yeah.
the ability to critical think, or they just aren't because they're so driven by their emotions. Would you say that's accurate?
I totally agree. There's a
Yeah.
lack of discernment. There is a massive lack of discernment, which comes from a lack of being tethered in biblical truth.
Yeah.
And like Proverbs, is known as the wisdom book. But beneath the surface of, like, Proverbs is a book about wisdom, but beneath the surface of that, it's a book about fearing the Lord. Proverbs uses the phrase, fear the Lord, or fear of the Lord 19 times. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge.
Hmm.
Wisdom comes from being God fearing. And if you're not God fearing, there is a worldly wisdom that God, through His grace, allows some people to have. I'm amazed at how much what I would describe as wisdom I see in, like, Elon Musk, right? That by
Mm.
the grace of God, he has this certain amount of worldly wisdom, but godly wisdom comes from God and from the fear of God. And as people who have forgotten God, to borrow the phrase from Solzhenitsyn, um, we're men who have forgotten God. We're losing the wisdom and discernment that comes from being a God-fearing people.